sure about our heritage. Umoja is the message, a call for unity.
I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show, HOTEP. I have a guest that I have been trying to get on this stage across from me so I could talk to him for forever. And in fact, he has been hiding in plain sight because he is a WVON Talk of Chicago talk show host, and everybody talks to him, but I was not able to when I wanted to. But now I have Salim Muwakil.
Yes, ma'am.
I love it. I'm so happy to greet you.
The pleasure absolutely is mine, Dr.
Well,
Peace.
I'm glad because I'm just so thrilled. You know, I want you to tell people more about yourself because you do all the listening. You know, people call in and tell you everything they want to say. So now I want you to tell the viewers everything you want to say.
Well,
Oh.
I'm a native of New York City, born in Harlem, and moved to Jersey while I was a teenager, and came up in that part of the world. Went into the Air Force. Well, before I did that, I also, I think I probably participated in some of the most iconic events of the period. I went to the March on Washington in '63 with four other brothers. We drove down from New Jersey to DC, and you know, I was there. I wasn't there for the civil rights aspect of it. We heard there would be a lot of women there, so that was our motivation. It turned out to be absolutely true. You know, it was a lot. In fact, I'm still in touch with a lot of the sisters that I met there. But I bumped into the civil rights movement, got a little spirit of activism. The next year, I was there when the first long hot summer riots popped off in Harlem in '64. My cousin got shot in that riot, and it was very upsetting to me in many ways. So I kind of jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, joined the service during the Vietnam era. And so I spent 4 years in the military where I was radicalized. This was a time when a lot of black servicemen were becoming radicalized, this Vietnam era. I also got shot during my last year, but not in any kind of a military skirmish. I got shot in Georgia by a white guy in a hotel, which further radicalized me. And as soon as I left the service in '69, I had to stay in about six months past my regular discharge date because I was recuperating from the gunshot. But as soon as I got out of the service, I joined the Black Panther Party. I had been that radicalized. I didn't even go home. As soon as I got out of the airport, I went straight to the Panther office in Jersey City at the time. And so I became a member of the Black Panthers from '69 to about '71, doing a lot of stuff, some good, some not repeatable, and continued to study and whatnot, and became a little bit disenchanted with what the Panthers were up to because it seemed to be a lot of a sense of simply letting off steam. We were rather than systematically doing something for our people, it was very contingent. You know, our fundraising technique was basically trying to convince store owners to donate to our cause, or their store would burn down the next day. That kind of unsustainable fundraising techniques. And I saw, as I was participating in all of that, we were next door to an establishment that was run by the Nation of Islam, and the contrast between what the Nation of Islam was doing and what a lot of the revolutionary activists at the time were doing was pretty stark. The nation was real serious, but not so. They were not getting involved in the kind of adventurous and media-friendly activity that a lot of the other folks were. They were just seriously going about their business, building other institutions. We were protesting about inattention in the curriculum to black issues. They were creating their own curriculum. And soon that style, that method, seemed to be the superior method to me. And I began turning more and more toward the Nation of Islam, till I eventually became a member of the Nation. And this was during the period also when I had been hired by the Associated Press. I was going to school at the time, Rutgers University in Jersey, which I had gotten into because of my Air Force service. They paid really all of the tuition and whatnot, so I did get something out of the service after getting shot and whatnot. And so I joined the Nation of Islam while I was working for the Associated Press. The Associated Press were located in Newark, New Jersey, which had a population of about 65% black. They didn't have any black reporters. The Kerner Commission had absolutely excoriated the media for being basically an apartheid institution. And so the media was scrambling to hire black reporters wherever they could get them. I think in Chicago they hired guys right out of like Rush Ewing, he was a fireman. Warner Saunders was a member of the Black Boys Foundation, the Better Boys Foundation. And so he became a reporter. So I mean, that kind of thing, they were rather desperate. They just wanted someone who was relatively literate, someone black who was, and so I got hired right out of college, right out of Rutgers. And so I was working for the AP, becoming deeply involved in the Nation of Islam at the time, and then I started writing for Muhammad Speaks. I started doing stringing for Muhammad Speaks from the East Coast. I was actually the official Newark correspondent for Muhammad Speaks during this period. Even as I was writing for the Associated Press, I would write a piece for the AP. I would go home at night, transform myself to this raging black Muslim, and then rewrite the article from the perspective of African Americans. And so really it gave me a discipline, a kind of a systematic understanding of how mainstream perspectives differed from the perspectives of that were most beneficial to black people. And so I did that for a while, those kinds of pieces. In fact, I did a piece when Assata Shakur, Joanne Chesma. I knew Joanne from my period in the Panthers. We had meetings in New York at the City College of New York, CCNY. But my editors assigned me to this crash that had happened on the Turnpike in Jersey, and I found out it was Joanne, who was Assata Shakur by then, a member of the Black Liberation Army, which was the Panther Party in another iteration. And so I went and I covered that, and I wrote about it for the AP. I tried to insert the very clear knowledge that forensic evidence did not implicate her as one of the shooters, but I couldn't get that into my story. And I became increasingly disenchanted with the AP because of that, and became very dedicated to writing pieces for Muhammad Speaks. And then eventually, one day I got a call on my phone in Jersey. A sister named Valora Najib, who was the personal secretary to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, called me. And when I heard her name, my heart stopped, because she was famous in the nation as being the secretary of the Messenger. And then I heard a voice, "Brother, I heard that you want to help us build a nation." And I recognized instantly that was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And so as soon as I hung up, almost before I hung up, my foot was out the door on my way to Chicago. And so I came to Chicago. That was in '73, the last part of '73, and I quit AP right away. Put on my clothes and hightailed it to Chicago. And then eventually I moved my family and blah, 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 and I've been here ever since. I started out with Muhammad Speaks as a news editor. I was there when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died. I did a lot of traveling before that. I went to Jamaica with Muhammad Ali. I went to Manila. I went to Uganda with Minister Farrakhan when we visited the OAU conference in '75 when Idi Amin was the chairman. So I did the tour of Uganda with Idi Amin. I went back the next year, as a matter of fact, in '76, and traveled all throughout East Africa and Egypt, and so eventually I left the world community of Islam. I just went into a different direction. I found different belief systems more compatible, and I started writing for other publications, mostly progressive, like the Reader. I was doing a lot of stuff for the Reader at the time. A lot of iconoclastic articles. That's kind of that was kind of my specialty. I was trying to find stories that other folks wouldn't deal with. Like I had a cover story on What Color Was Christ in the Reader, which was rather path-breaking for a publication like that. That was the story was dealing with Wallace Muhammad and his intention to question the prevalence of white images of divinity in religious institutions, like white pictures of Christ, and what effect did that have on black worshipers? Did it have an unconscious effect, the white supremacist aspect of it? And that was the basis of the article, but I did it in a way that brought a lot of different elements into it. And so I became one of the Reader's favorite writers for those kinds of subjects, and I did a lot of that. And then I started writing. I got picked up. I did a lot of freelancing at the time as well. A lot of freelancing. I wrote for Washington Post, New York Times. I did a review of James Baldwin's his last book, The Price of the Ticket, for the New York Times. And I've done. I used to specialize in book reviews. I did a lot for Sun Times, Washington Post, and that was kind of my niche, the kind of intellectual journalism. And that's what I've been doing. I started writing a column for the Sun Times in '94, and I did that until '97, and then in '98 I started for the Tribune writing a column, and I did that until 2003. And so during all that period, I was a senior editor for a publication called In These Times, which is a kind of a non-sectarian, left-leaning progressive publication that's been around now for a long time, and is doing better than ever right now. And I'm still there. I'm senior editor there, as well as occasional freelancer for other publications. I do the radio show on VON, and that's me.
Well, you can't stop saying I do a radio show on WVON because that right now is your claim to fame in my part of the world.
Yes, ma'am.
So tell me about that. How did that come about, and what do you find fulfilling in that?
I love doing it. I mean, I started actually in '93. I was doing a Sunday show for VON. Wesley South hired me. He wanted me to do some journalistic reflections on the news, a lot of foreign policy issues, because I've had I used to do a lot of foreign policy columns for the Sun Times and the Trib. That has been my interest since the Air Force. That was my training in the Air Force. I was working in intelligence as a radio intelligence interpreter, and so I would have to be very knowledgeable on what was going on in the so-called behind the Iron Curtain, and I used to analyze a lot of that kind of stuff, and that became something that I was fond of and pretty good at, and so that was what Mr. South wanted me to do, and I did that for a while. I did, I think, 3 years, and then a gospel show took over. It was on Sunday night, and so then when VON moved to the new location, I got a call again. Did I want to do a show? Kind of the same thing, digesting the news, international news, in a way that made it a lot more relevant and interesting to African Americans in the city. And also, the way I look at it is it's kind of a improvisational show. I like to simply let the callers set the tone. Wherever they go, I try to be informed enough to be able to go there with them and to provide some context for what they're saying. So it requires me to always be aware of what's going on in the world, because I never know what they're going to bring up, and that's the way I like to operate on the show.
How long have you been operating like that?
10 years.
WVON.
10 years on this particular iteration. And I started out on Saturdays. For a while I was doing Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays as well. And eventually, and that changed over time, and sometimes it went up and sometimes it went down. And now I'm just doing Saturdays, which is fine with me.
Well, it's fine with me. There are just so many things that you brought to mind. I claimed that this show was going to be combat zones, foreign and domestic, and it may be, but mostly what I wanted it to be was Salim, because I've been wanting to have, this. I've had this interest in knowing from whence you come, because you're such an interesting person. You first of all caught my attention with having been shot while you were in the military.
Yes, ma'am.
But not in combat.
Right.
So I think if you can give us a little bit more background on that, it would clear that up, because I know my viewers are sitting out there trying to work that out.
Well, unfortunately, it's not so much of a noble story. It was, as many servicemen do, I was on the chase of women, females. That's basically what we do in our off-duty time. And there was a young lady from New York City who was visiting Georgia. I was stationed in Georgia, a part of Georgia called Warner Robins, right outside of Macon. And this New York sister was in town, and everyone was bidding for her attention. I was bidding as well, and being from New York, I had a kind of a
inside track.
Exactly right. So we wound up at a friend's house and had a good time, and we were going to a hotel.
Yes.
After all of that, and this was a hotel that a lot of servicemen would go to, and so it was pretty well known. And when I went in there, the manager gave me a price that I thought was excessive, and I was just a foolish service guy. I was a foolish airman. Had drunk a little bit too much. I was protesting against what I considered an inflation, instant inflation of the price. I started using words like that indicated I was not from the area, that I was northern. I was saying black. At the time, black was controversial to say. Mm-hmm. This was '68 in Georgia.
Yeah.
The same year Martin Luther King was shot.
Right.
In Georgia, not in Georgia, but in a hotel as well.
Right.
So I said the wrong thing. I was too obsequious. I was too obstinate. I was too. I got into his into his face a bit too much, and the manager just pulled out a .38 and shot me, you know, so it was, in a lot of ways it was my fault. I was a little bit too too aggressive, and this was Georgia. I had been influenced by black militants. Martin Luther King had been shot earlier. We had marched on the base when that happened, talking about Umgawa Black Power, Umgawa Black Power, and so I was punished for my obstinance. My boys, though, you know, they burned down his joint right after that happened. I heard later, you know, I was in the hospital. It was pretty serious. I was shot in the abdomen with a .38. I had to stay in the hospital for 6 months to recuperate.
Well, you know, my read on that would be that you're taking far too much responsibility for what happened, because you ought to be able to protest if you think that you're being treated unfairly, especially if you think that as you mentioned, the price was unduly inflated. And, you know, all of the other stuff, you know, I think we have this kind of penchant to try to figure out what we did wrong when we are wronged. And that's, you know, that's a good practice when it comes to automobile accidents. You know, if you get in an automobile accident, they want to know how much of it was your fault, how much of it was the other driver's fault. But I think that, you know, our place in the society always makes it suspect to me that, you know, something that we did led to our being discriminated against, led to our being offended, insulted, taken for granted. So I think that sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is from the standpoint of being human beings who don't like to be violated.
Absolutely.
And if we sense violation, we respond, and we tend to respond vehemently.
Yes.
So, you know, I forgive you, you know, and because it could have been worse. You know,
Ooh,
you could not have survived that, and
Absolutely.
then we wouldn't be able to sit here and ask you to tell us some stories about you. See, I'm seeing you graduating because you're saying, well, I went over here and I was with this, and this was who I was, and then I observed something else that appeared to be more in sync with who I saw myself as being, and then at some point I outgrew or graduated from that, which is for me a sign of very great intelligence, to know and not be hypocritical, to know when you are out of congruity with the situation that you're in, and not to stay in it and pretend that you are still with it when in fact you are not. So
Very, very good. Very good.
that's
point,
habit
sister.
for me. That's an integrity. But I like the fact that you know, you have had all these experiences, especially as a journalist, because when you tell me you've been writing from all these different perspectives based upon where you were and what the subject matter was, and now that you have a radio station, you're listening and you're trying to be sufficiently informed to relate to whatever the position is that the caller has. How do you avoid getting into a one-on-one dispute with a caller? Because sometimes I've heard people say stuff and I just, you know, I would have taken them on.
Right, and no, I know exactly what you mean. It's difficult, and sometimes I don't succeed. Sometimes I get drawn into it. But you know, with the kind of wide variety of experiences that I've had, and previously being convinced of one way, and then coming to a conclusion that way had some limitations. You know, like at one point, the Black Panther Party was the absolute answer. I didn't see anything.
Were you on the west side with the Black Panther
No,
Party?
I was in Jersey.
Oh, so you weren't anywhere near
I wasn't
Fred
in
Hampton.
Chicago. No.
Okay.
We heard of Fred, you know,
Okay.
and he was an icon to us.
Okay,
But
okay.
I was on the East Coast at that time.
Okay.
And especially when the Panthers broke, when Elridge Cleaver became a member and broke it, and it was really beyond Elridge Cleaver, but he is the one who precipitated the split to when the East Coast Panthers became the Black Liberation Army. They went underground, and the West Coast Panthers became more electorally oriented. Bobby Seale ran for mayor and whatnot, and this was during that period. But I began to see that the Panthers really, a lot of the Panthers was catharsis, and that was necessary. We needed catharsis, but it's limited. It has a limited application, and I saw the Nation of Islam as being much more serious about
And disciplined.
about how to achieve liberation for our people. And the Panthers were talking about a revolutionary personality that we needed a change in the mode of production so that it would create a revolutionary personality. And the Nation of Islam was creating that really from the inside out. And it seemed to me that was the most logical way to go. And I did move. I did graduate, as you point out, matriculate, I guess you can say, from the Panthers to the Nation. Although I never really rejected the Panthers, I still understood their attraction and whatnot, but I went into a different direction. And then in the Nation, you know, when Warith Muhammad took over, I thought it was really about time, because and many former members, many members who had been nurtured by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad also reasoned that it was time to graduate to the second resurrection, is what we called it at the time. But then, you know, you did see a lot of people regress. The lack of discipline, the lack of a strict code of discipline allowed people to go back, so to speak, to drift back into the dead world, as we would say. And I can understand, when I went to Uganda with Minister Farrakhan, we went under the regime of Wallace Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad had just died in 75, and we went to Uganda that summer. 75. And Minister Farrakhan at that time was under the guidance of Wallace Muhammad, and he was trying to reconcile his former position. Even at the time, you could tell he was having some problems trying to reconcile it. But he had concluded that perhaps it was time for graduation, you know, a new way of looking at Islam. He later changed his mind after seeing so many other brothers who couldn't handle that kind of freedom, I think is. You know, it's my own speculation as to why he decided to go back. And he's performed, some would say, a miracle by reviving the nation in the way he did. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that, you know, organizations are made of human beings.
Yes.
You know, and they have human attributes. And not all of them can remain constant and steadfast. And some of them do backslide, as we would say in the church.
Right.
And there's nothing that you can do about that, except that you need to always have young people in the organization who can carry on whatever the ideals are of the people who founded the organization. If the organization's mission is going to be carried out, which is another matter, because sometimes people join for reasons other than to fulfill a mission. Some people join because there are good-looking women there. Some people, some people.
That was one of the Panthers' problems as well. You know, it became hip, you know, chic.
Right.
And that beret and that stylish.
Right.
thing,
So now these are appealing. These are brothers who seem like they got their act together. They got a vision of where they going, you know, and they strong and they virulent and they taking care of the children. And look at the press. You know what was in the press? You were writing in the press.
Yes.
You know, black men were next to nothing on the
Absolutely.
scale of social beings.
It's still hard to get good press for black men, except in athletics and you know, entertainment.
Right. What in these times? What do you write?
Well-
Do you ever have to address any of the social issues affecting our people?
All the time. That's my specialty. Really.
Okay, tell me something recent.
Recently, I wrote a piece on reparations.
Okay, what's your position?
Well, I've been, you know, my first piece on that was pro reparations was in 1993 for Sun
Oh,
Times.
you've been out there a long time.
Yeah, I did a 93 piece for the Sun Times. You know, I met Queen Mother Moore was with us in Uganda that time, as a matter of fact.
Does anybody not know? You don't have to be from New York. Everyone knows. How does she become? We had to sidetrack. How did Queen Mother Moore become Queen Mother Moore, such a revered
Amazing.
person?
And the thing is everyone knew her in Uganda, not just Americans, but Africans knew her. She was I mean, she was a revered person. We had a, you know, I'll never forget. This was really my first time sitting down with her. We had at the, I'm trying to think of the hotel, Palm Hotel. That's not the name, but we were sitting down in the hotel in Uganda, and our discussion was about how the vegetation in Uganda seemed to be animate. It was so vibrant. It seemed to be animate. It seemed like the plants were whispering. And we were marveling at that, and that was our conversation. I'll never forget that, me and Queen Mother Moore. But yeah, but so, I mean, I've been acquainted with the reparations argument for a while.
Okay.
And I've been pushing it for a while. It seems to me that it's intellectual malfeasance not to push it for anyone who's really studied our issues, because that's one of the obvious answers to the problems we have.
I agree, but then I think it's almost fruitless. It seems futile, which doesn't mean that you don't try to do something because it appears that you cannot succeed at doing it, because otherwise most of us wouldn't have done anything, because the odds always seem so great, and so the cards always seem to be stacked against us. But it's very, very difficult for me to think of how you can actually quantify what is owed to the dehumanization of an entire people. It
Yes.
just, you know, how I would accept that check, you know, it was difficult for me, because I wouldn't want the perpetrators of this oppression to feel that they had paid their debt, because they cannot repay the debt. So what is it that we would like to have? We would like for them to just do a token acknowledgement of the damage that they have done to our people, by putting a number on it, and I just don't know what to do with it. I just know that, you know, if you could unring the bell, they just needed not to come and to us, you know, and impose their worldview and their culture and their quest for imperialism on us. They just needed to stay where they were and do that to their own people.
Well,
But-
I got you, but you know, here we are, and we, you know, the argument is just so overwhelming. The logic is overwhelming, favoring reparations, that regardless of the plausibility
Right.
of it being implemented, I think
Right.
we have an obligation to make the point. And who knows about the plausibility? I mean, I didn't think it would be possible, and I'm sure you didn't either, that we would have a black president.
Right.
And although we see in retrospect that wasn't such a that wasn't such a grand occasion, but at the same time, it was symbolically significant.
Right.
And
Well,
here-
you know, the thing is, if the Japanese people were given reparations for the crimes against them, then certainly we no less deserve,
absolutely.
because the crime against them had a starting point and an end point. You know, theirs didn't go down through centuries.
Right.
So that you could say that
And
just based on that, you know, the fact that you do give reparations to people you have harmed, and you need. But then, of course, the argument was that slavery was legal because it was part of the law. It had not been outlawed, so it was legal. So no damage was done to black people because it was lawful to own people. What do you do with that argument?
Well, the UN has declared slavery a crime against humanity, and there is absolutely no statute of limitation on any crime against humanity.
So
that's taken.
you couldn't make it lawful just because you practice it.
That's right.
Okay.
You know, it is the situation is that I mean it would be akin to let's say the Marshall Plan after World War II when this country delivered outright currency transfers to former enemies as well as our allies, and without any questions asked. Didn't ask them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That was only after 2.5 years of combat. Germany is still paying reparations to Israel, you know, for the Nazi experience. And so, I mean, it's a principle that's well established in international discourse. And so, it seems to me like there's really no argument for it, against it. If there's any group of people who are deserving of it, it is us. And I think it could be encapsulated in a sort of Marshall Plan, system.
Well, let me be clear that I am in favor of our people being compensated to the fullest extent possible for the crimes against our people.
Absolutely right.
I just don't think there's enough money on the planet to do it, and I don't think there's a will on the part
that's what it is, will
of other people to do it. But when I if I just look at the circumstances under which the majority of us live right now, we could just use some relief for right now. You know, people are struggling. Everywhere you look, they're trying to make ends meet. We don't have to cite all the unemployment rate and all the things that say that people lack revenue, they lack resources, the foreclosures of homes, the people who never owned homes in the first place, the people, the families who are living together because they can't live separately. You know, grown children who are still at home because even though they have been to college, they can't find employment out in the real world, and so consequently they can't support themselves. So they're trying to be adults in the homes of other people, trying to be independent while being dependent at the same time, which is an oxymoron because you can't be those two things in the same person. But if we just had just some relief from the daily oppression of living while black.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, if you didn't go back anywhere, if you didn't go back to the period during our captivity, if you didn't go back, if you just started with right now, get this monkey, get this elephant, you know, off us.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, and that's really, it's the legacy of slavery. That's
Right.
really what it is.
Right.
One thing, in 2014, was it 14 or 15? I think it was 14. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that piece about reparations in the Atlantic.
You commented on that. You want to say something about that?
I do. I mean, I think that
I saw you.
Yeah. He's I mean, I really respect his skill, his writing skills, and he made an impeccable case for reparations. And he didn't even go back to slavery. He was only talking about the period of right after World War II, the housing situation in Chicago, and how that alone is justification for reparatory justice and reparatory justice, and so he made the case really with kind of an extraordinary argument justifying that, and that's not even going back, you know. So
start at any point in history.
any point in history, you know, that legacy is heavy, and it weighs on us, and it has a lot of effects. I think one of the effects it has, and I speak on this quite a bit, is it's restricted our cultural capital. And what I mean by that is other people have ways of behaving, values that are imbued by their families and whatnot, that encourage success, ways of behaving that lead them toward success because of the way they move in the world. We have not had the ability to do that because we've always been on the edge of survival. We've never had the opportunity to develop those kind of skills. That's why immigrants come here and jump over us, because they've had that opportunity in their own indigenous societies to develop those skills. Because we've been deprived of our own cultural heritage, we've been socialized for subservience for the most part. We've never had that ability to acquire those cultural skills, and that is extremely important. We'll do it though. We have the organic vitality to do it if we have just the smallest opportunity. We did it. We did it in Greenwood. We did it in Rosewood, in Greenwood, Oklahoma. We did it in Rosewood, Florida. We did it in many small towns around America when we had the opportunity. But we don't get that opportunity. It threatens white people.
Right.
Like again, Ta-Nehisi says, you know, he has a new book. It's called 8 Years in Power, and it was talking about this guy. During the Reconstruction period, who in South Carolina, a black congressman who said, why is the Redeemers coming to take away the power of black folks that we gained during Reconstruction? Because South Carolina, for example, benefited from our government. It was good Negro government.
Right.
But the point is that's what white people are afraid of. It's good Negro government because it undermines white supremacy on every level.
How can you claim to be superior?
Exactly right.
If the people who you're claiming are inferior are exceeding you.
That's why when we came back from the wars, it was the soldiers who were the ones who were targets of lynching, because the soldiers represented black excellence, and that's what white supremacy can't stand.
I think about how you talk about in the context of opportunities. James Brown said, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I'll get it myself. Just get out the way. You know, sometimes it's not opportunities we need, it is obstacles that we need you not to put in our path when we're on our way to something. Because even though it may not be that we have learned the kind of behaviors that sets us on a path towards success or aspiring to be successful in the society, there's something about us, you know, you can call it hustling if you want to.
That's a good word for it.
It's called improvisation, like your improvisational show. We will make a way out of no way. Improvisation is our strong suit.
That's jazz.
And if you just leave us alone and don't put mountains in our path, we will find a way. We have always found a way. we find a way to take care of ourselves. We find a way to feed, a house full of people on virtually no money. We find a way to make it. It's called improvisation. Jacob Rutter said, God created hog intestines, black people created chitlins.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Because even when we were given the scraps,
That's right.
we made them such that they were not only nurturing, but they were delectable.
Okay.
But the thing is
Well, we made delicacies
that
out of that.
improvisation is our strong suit. If you do not have people changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game, if you do not have people slanting the playing field, see, opportunity is one part of that issue. The other part of the issue is, telling us to raise ourselves, lift ourselves by our bootstraps when we barefooted. You cannot do some things because you are forbidden or prohibited, or somebody has put a millstone, a sack of millstones around your neck, and where you would thrive or you would survive or you would make progress, you don't make progress.
Absolutely.
Because you're being restrained. What song said, I refuse to be held back anymore. We're being held back.
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
being restrained. We're being restricted. So reparations, if you give us reparation, if we are given what we deserve, reparations, if we have them under the same conditions, they will not benefit us to the extent that they should. Because if you put the same obstacles out there, if you deny the same opportunities, we'll be back in the same position that we're in before you can blink an eye.
Well, that could be true, but what reparations would do is it would provide a floor that would allow us not to fall into the edge of survival, to survival ethics. And when we're not living by survival ethics, we have a chance to develop that cultural capital, that ability to improvise in a way that allows us to thrive despite the barriers that we have. As long as we're on the edge of survival, we won't be able to. Even the Nation of Islam, even Minister Farrakhan had to try to import the Dianetics, which is a technique from Scientology, because so many of us are damaged by our socialization process that even when we have the opportunity, we don't take advantage of it. We're not fully employing our psychic powers like we should, and that's what will, I think, once we are no longer devoted or limited to survival ethics, we can do that. We can develop ourselves in a lot better and more fulsome way.
Well, I support reparations. I do. I'm just one of these people who always raises questions.
Good question.
Because I think you raise the question so you can answer the question so you can succeed at what you're doing. So if you never consider what the obstacles are, what the considerations are, then you run up on them unprepared to meet them.
That's right.
But if you know that there will be resistance, and you know that resistance is deep-seated intolerance,
Deep-seated, very deep.
for our people, then you understand that you've got to overcome that. You've got to transcend that. And sometimes you can do it with moral suasion, and other times you just have to just keep pushing with force so that you can achieve the goal. And sometimes when people find out that when you have achieved a goal, it doesn't make a difference of any kind, in their own lives, then they wonder why they were afraid in the first place.
That's right.
Because we're not, we're not trying to take them off the planet.
Right, right.
We're
What-
just
what are they
trying
afraid
to
of?
find a
Exactly.
place on the planet that we can occupy.
That is exactly right. What are they afraid of? I mean, facing up to their history, to the legacy of slavery, and the implications of what that legacy is. That should be, without question. Other